So a very warm welcome to this session tonight. We are so excited to bring you this. It's great to see some familiar faces as well as I think lots of new ones as well. So yeah, Vicky and I are super excited to bring you this presentation. We're going to make time for questions at the end, so do feel free to drop them into the chat or stick your hands up at the end, whatever you'd prefer. Just a couple of pieces of housekeeping. If you can keep yourselves muted, that would be grand until the end, obviously. And as you've probably noticed, this is being recorded. So if you wish to remain off camera, that's absolutely fine. So yeah, I think without further ado, let's get going.
Okay, I'm going to get started with my story. Thank you everyone for joining us. I'm Vicky Jones. I'm actually a 30-month long hauler. So I have been dealing with the symptoms of long haul COVID now for 38 months. And prior to getting COVID, I was a personal trainer, a dietitian. In my younger years, I was an international athlete. And when I got COVID, I was what I considered fit, strong, healthy, happy. I was also a dysfunctional breather. I didn't know it at the time, but I was a dysfunctional breather. And one of the things about COVID is the last thing on your mind when you get the virus is that COVID is going to turn into long COVID. And I know back when I contracted the virus, I had never even heard of long COVID. It wasn't anything on my spectrum of thought. And it wasn't until I didn't get better that I started investigating what long COVID was. I don't even think there was a name for it back then. But the symptoms that I have encountered over the past 3+ years have been so varied. Fatigue, shortness of breath, tachycardia, bradycardia. I've had a couple of mini strokes, shingles, nervous issues, seizures, mouth sores, and then the big one, COVID toes. All such bizarre symptoms and digestive issues that are so strange when you're a healthy person and then you start experience this. But I am the type of person that looks for answers, and I started to look for answers of what would help me. And I literally, my husband too, we became our own doctors because there just wasn't any information out there. And a couple of people had talked about breathing with me, and I tried the W breathing program. I'm not allowed to mention it, and one of the other programs, and both of them didn't help me. But on a cognitive, I knew that there was something in the breathing that could be modified for me. And that's when I reached out to Patrick, and not going to cry here. Patrick was the first person who was caring enough. He was compassionate enough, and he listened. And when you have been a long hauler who's been sort of gaslit with these are things that you're not really experiencing, it was such a welcome thing. And that's when I became a functional breather. Patrick listened, he modified things, and it gave me an arsenal of breathing exercises that have literally become the pillar of my day-to-day life. It is the thing that I turn to the most when I'm ill. And last week I had an unfortunate episode that I had a very severe bout of bradycardia, and I was unfortunately in the ambulance, and they were monitoring my heart, and I could hear them talking. I'm not actually conscious enough to speak, but my heart rate had gone down to 33. My husband arrived, held my hand, and said, "Vikki, you know what to do. Inhale and exhale. Inhale and exhale." And that is my story of breathing. That's why it is so important that we get this word out to other long haulers who can use it to help in their day-to-day life. So I'm going to stop talking there and pass it over to Jackie.
So I also caught COVID as a quote unquote completely fit, healthy, very active, sort of living a very full life kind of person. And well, I wouldn't be here if it hadn't all gone a little bit wrong after that. Um, so yeah, you know, March 2020, what should have been a very simple thing became a 3.5 year kind of battle. And you know, through this, I learned an awful lot of things. It sent me in a direction that I didn't see myself going in. One of the first things I actually did was start the Long COVID podcast, because, like Vikki, I was the sort of person that needed answers. I needed to do something, and actually, what I should have been doing was nothing. But that's part of the story, isn't it? But through all of this, I found breathing, and it was the first thing that really helped me. So when I was going through badder, you know, worse periods, crashes, it was breathing that I turned to once I discovered how much it could help. And I think it really was breathing that I then built the rest of my recovery on top of. You know, that led me on to other things like yoga nidra. It then enabled me to do things like cold water, which eventually helped me to fully recover earlier this year. So it was a hugely important part of my recovery. And yeah, it really was kind of the foundation of everything. So because it's been such an important thing for me, I think that's why I think it's so important to get that out to everybody else, because I just want to share it and help other people who are still sort of fighting their fight, because it's not a lot of fun. Um, I was also, I think, a dysfunctional breather before COVID. I wouldn't have called myself that at the time because I didn't even know that there was a way to breathe incorrectly, but as it turned out, there was. So the first thing I did was to fix that, and then to use the breath to influence the nervous system as a sort of secondary feeding back into that. So we're going to be talking a whole load about all sorts of stuff. So I think enough about me, and moving on hopefully to our next slide. There we go. So yeah, tonight we are going to hopefully cover why learning to breathe correctly makes such a huge difference in long COVID recovery, why breathing as a sort of therapeutic thing can also help long COVID symptoms. And these two first things are both things that I have massively benefited from. What we're also going to talk about is how to modify exercises based on how clients are feeling. So the standard breathing exercises that we might give to other clients may not be 100% appropriate for long COVID people, depending on how they're doing at certain periods. And we're also going to talk about pacing, which was something that I had to learn about, and I'm still to this day not very good at. But I think you know, who is really. So hopefully that's a little bit of an overview what we're going to go through. So yeah, what is long COVID? The World Health Organization's definition is continuation or development of new symptoms 3 months after the initial COVID infection, with these symptoms lasting at least 2 months with no other explanation. And, you know, that's kind of wordy. What does that actually mean? I mean, it basically means a chronic illness with a huge variety of symptoms that nobody really seems to have cracked yet. So I think, long COVID, we have people who were ill almost 4 years ago, because we know that actually there were plenty of people infected with this virus at the end of 2019, which is horrendously nearly 4 years ago. Some of these people have been ill since then. There are some people who have only been ill for about 3 months and are just coming into the start of their long COVID journey, as of around about now. I think the current figure is somewhere around 10 or so, possibly more percent of infections end in long COVID. So this is not something that is going to go away, unfortunately. Long COVID has a very wide range of severity, symptoms, impact. This varies day to day, person to person, and long COVID is, of course, real. Doesn't matter what certain doctors, certain people may have told you, long COVID is absolutely real. And it is very, very real to those people who are suffering from it.
So one of the things about long COVID is 4 years ago, prior to the virus actually coming into our lives, there was no such thing as long COVID. Obviously, there was probably no such thing as COVID. And long COVID has actually, from the get-go, been driven by those that are suffering with it. And for that reason, it's very difficult for a lot of gathering of data to come along, because initially it was just the weirdest thing that people weren't recovering. They were reporting these symptoms. And for that reason, it was often misdiagnosed. The doctors didn't even see this coming. So up until very recently, even though we've understood it as being very real, there is still no diagnostic test. You can't go to the doctor. There's no how-to manual for recovery. And what we're trying to help you with today is that this is an illness that people suffer from, and it's so hard to explain to people that don't have it, because it is literally bizarre. So the numbers that we're looking at right now, Jackie found the numbers in the UK that we've got 2 million at the moment. There's in the USA, the Center for Disease Control came up with a number of 8.8 million as of August 23. I'm going to add one person to that. That's me, because I didn't fill out my CDC form. But it's not until August of 2023. We've got a couple of things that have just come out. And the headline was, long COVID is real. That came out 4 years after long COVID started. And the other thing that we are now seeing is that long COVID recovery is rare. And they're putting a number of like between 10 and 20% actually recover from long COVID. So you've got Jackie, who's recovered, and you've got me. Unfortunately, I still deal with some severe and not so severe symptoms. Now, going back to why this is why breathing, why you are so important, is that because there's no how-to manual, there's no doctor's answers, then as people that suffer from long COVID, what we do is we start doctoring ourselves, we start looking for answers. And one of the answers that keeps coming up is breathing. And that's why we become, as breathing coaches, so important to the people who are suffering and dealing with long COVID. So I want you to kind of close your eyes, and, well, don't close your eyes, but first of all, read about the symptoms. So these are the symptoms that people have. I know I mentioned some of the things that had personally happened to me, but this is a tiny example of the symptoms that the long COVID sufferers have. They have recorded up to 200 different symptoms, and every individual is very different. So if you can imagine being a healthy person and then suddenly being bombarded with these symptoms that change on a daily basis, they change on a weekly basis, they change on a monthly basis, they come in clusters, sometimes you're symptom free. It is frustrating, and it is so unknown. And therefore you get the symptoms that come along, but then you get the feelings of being so scared because we don't know when this is going to end. The feelings of anxiety, being let down or being misunderstood by the medical community. And I know those are very negative things, but they're real to the people that are suffering from long COVID. And often what happens is, if you can get into the doctor, you know, the symptoms that you are experiencing, you're often not symptomatic when you go to the doctor. And therefore you get a lot of the gaslighting, not only from the medical community, but from family and friends, and definitely from employers. So one of the things that we can look at and take away from this slide is that the autonomic nervous system is in a dysfunctional state. So if you look at the symptoms, they are all controlled by the autonomic nervous system. So I'm going to go back to the fact that the one thing that we can control as long COVID sufferers is our breathing. That's the only part of our autonomic nervous system that we have control over. So that's why it's so important that we get the word out that people can use breathing to help alleviate some of the severity of their symptoms, but also to calm their anxiety and the other things, the panic that they have and the depression and frustration. Breathing, we know, will also help with that.
So we're talking here about an autonomic nervous system that is dysfunctional. So it is not sending the right messages to the body. The heart is doing all sorts of crazy things. I think tachycardia is more common than bradycardia, but both are possible. All these other things that are going on and making us feel absolutely terrible and just completely dysfunctional as humans. And of course, when the nervous system is not really functioning, it is getting very, very easily stressed. So we think, there's obvious stressors such as physical stressors. We all know that actually if we exercise too hard, our body will let us know. But when we're talking about long COVID, physical stressors could be, for example, brushing your teeth. They could be, actually for some people who are very, very severely unwell, it could be actually just getting up, um, you know, and this can change on a day-to-day basis. But there's other stresses that maybe we wouldn't have thought about so much, chemical. If someone has a sort of particular chemical sensitivity, something like a strong perfume or, cooking ingredients, emotional stressors. It took me a long time to work out that actually each time I had an argument with my partner, it would knock me out for days. So, just an emotional argument. Financial stressors, when you're not able to function, paying for medical care, not being able to work, all of these things are hugely, hugely stressful. Medical treatments, procedures, and just lifestyle, losing everything that you thought made you. You're not able to function at all. So all of these things that we would take for granted as a healthy human, you know, going to the shops, for example, um, you may not be able to do, certainly not able to do with any kind of regularity or without cost. Which brings us on to pacing. So, pacing is something that, well, I don't think anyone is any good at pacing, but it's something that, as people with long COVID, and you know, this covers other chronic conditions as well, is that, you know, you have to pace everything. So, you know, it's not quite as simple as doing a big day of exercise and having a day off afterwards. It's breaking that down into, I got up and made my breakfast, therefore I then need to rest for an hour. Um, and pacing is also extremely difficult because your energy levels will differ day to day. So you think, okay, well, yesterday was able to do this and then rest and then that and then rest, and I was okay. But actually today I might wake up with half the energy. So we call it spoons. Um, so you know, you have to make sure you've got enough spoons to do the things, but it's a very difficult thing to do because it's not particularly predictable. Um, Vikki mentioned gaslighting earlier. There's also certain things that can be particularly triggering for people with long COVID. Um, you never had a positive test. Are you sure you had COVID? Is this really the issue here? Surely the issue is that the person is not functional. Um, you know, telling someone that they look fine, it means you mean well, but it can be extremely triggering to somebody that's been told by their doctor that, well, all your tests are normal, so there's probably nothing wrong with you. um, and also another common one, oh well, I had COVID and I was fine. Well, that's wonderful, I'm very happy for you, but 3 years later I'm not. Um, so I think I've certainly become much more aware of language and how things that I say might be taken by somebody else who has suffered this, you know, horrible life-changing event, but you know, also is living with a dysfunctional nervous system, so they may be more sensitive to a lot of things as well. So I think it's definitely something that I've had to bear in mind. Um, So we talked about being traumatized. You know, we've got, you know, trauma when our world as we know it is changed without our consent. When you catch a virus and don't get better and are still suffering the effects of it several years later. I think that just about covers it. But you know, what happens inside us as a result of what happens to us. So again, this is overtaxing the nervous system, making it more dysfunctional. So you know, there's different types of trauma, as I'm sure you know, and you know, different people will react differently to a similar stimulus. So it's not always going to be the same for everybody. But you know, the fact of being unwell for a long time, we're talking multiple years here. You know, that's continual trauma. I remember speaking to somebody who had said, you know, I think, you know, it was quite traumatic when I couldn't breathe. And she was saying, well, yes, but that happened every night. I went to sleep every night for over a year not being sure I was going to wake up the next day. Like, that's trauma. But there were also people, I'm going to say people earlier on, but that's not going to be all of them, but largely maybe earlier on because of the, you know, complete lack of medical care. People who actually were left home when they shouldn't have been, people who suffered, you know, all sorts of, you know, traumatic events in their initial infection. So you know, lots of different types of trauma going on there. And when the body is experiencing trauma, the breathing pattern obviously can do all sorts of not particularly healthy things. So we've got our fight and flight response, which is probably the one that is most familiar to people. So your fast heart rate, fast and irregular breathing, shallow upper chest breathing, you know, your hyperventilation, hard breathing, mouth breathing. sighing and being prone to panic attacks. We're all probably quite familiar with that. The other side of that actually is the shutdown and freeze state. So our sort of defense state when the body just can't take anymore. So that is another one that many people with long COVID can get very, very stuck in. So again, this is really emphasizing, all of the things on that list are all things that we as breathing instructors, we know what to do with this stuff. Like, this is where we really can have an impact on these symptoms.
So I think we're going to lift up our we're going to lift ourselves up now, because one of the things, we're not trying to make this a very down thing, but one of the things as instructors, as coaches, that we have to do is we have to understand our client. And that's why we were, in a way, sharing our story, sharing some of the numbers, sharing some of the experiences of other people. Because if you're going to work with people with long COVID, you have to be able to, you're not going to walk in their shoes, but you have to understand what they're going through. And assessing your client on a daily basis or on a weekly basis is really important. And these categories I actually made up because Jackie and I were talking about it, and it's like, often there's two types of categories for long COVID. You're either horizontal, it means you're in bed, you're on the couch, you're really not moving. And that's the horizontal long COVID, or the vertical, where you're kind of walking around, you're upright, certainly most of the day. But you get the people that are literally bedridden, and you get the people that can function to a certain extent. And you can have people that have these major crashes. We call them episodes, we call them relapses. There's so many words which you will hear your clients talk about, and it can be acute and it can be chronic. So all the things that we've said, how much it varies on a day-to-day basis, week to week, month to month. So you need to assess your client every time you see them. It's a very, very lonely journey that people with long COVID go on. There's not a lot of people reaching out to help. So when you come into someone's life who has long COVID, you may be an incredible support for them. And it's important that we are flexible to their needs, and also that, they may cancel on you, and don't take that personally. It's like, sometimes we just don't have the energy to do the work on that day. All right, so let's get into some of these exercises that are appropriate for clients with long COVID. Now, Jackie and I don't need to explain these exercises, because you know what they are. However, we're going to keep reiterating that you need to make the exercises appropriate for the client that's sitting in front of you. And sometimes the littlest win can be just teaching someone to nasal breathe. That may be all that they're able to do. Or doing some diaphragmatic breathing, sitting down or laying down. Now, when I initially came into breathing, and I was working with a different program, cadence breathing was something that I never heard of, but they were teaching it to us. But they were teaching it to us with a 4 and a 6 rhythm. And at the time, I had a Bolt score of 3. So you can imagine that absolutely knocked me out. It actually caused a relapse. So that's why we've written those numbers: 1 and 2, 1 and 3, 2 and 4. You have to assess your client. And then the single nostril breathing is sometimes used, just like I said, to increase the vagal nervous system. But the one thing that long COVID clients don't need, they don't need the stressor exercises. Our bodies are already in that stress state. So what we're trying to do with the breathing exercises that we share is to get their bodies into the parasympathetic state, the rest and the digest. Keeping the exercises short, keeping the exercises uncomplicated. And the other thing that is in your control is the ability to modify the exercises based on your client. So modification, and then we're going to go back to that big word of pacing. For long COVID clients, often it's a little and often, not big training sessions of 10 minutes, do 10 minutes of this or 10 minutes of that. Keep it short. And if they have the energy and the cognitive ability, it is also to keep them very simple. I know when I first started learning breathing exercises, I actually had to have my husband sit next to me because my ability to understand things was so diminished that he actually sat and wrote things down, because A, I couldn't comprehend what was going on, and B, I couldn't remember. So having, we're talking about how to set up programs, but sometimes your client may need a significant other with them so that they can help explain the exercises so that they can remember. And it's a good way to have that sort of secondary coach with you.
So moving on to sleep, again, I don't need to tell you how important sleep is for a person to function, because we know all about this. We know about the links between sleep and breathing and sleep and mental health. I think actually, just taking a very quick tangent here, mental health is something that is not talked about enough in long COVID. Again, for good reason, because people with long COVID have often been told that it's quote unquote just anxiety. So I think people are very worried about mentioning any mental health concerns that they may have, because they're terrified that their doctor's going to turn around and say, I told you so. So I think, but a side effect of having something like long COVID, where your entire world is basically turned upside down in a moment, it would be silly to not think that people will have mental health issues on the side of that as a result. So coming back to sleep and the connection there with mental health, long COVID can have a huge disturbance in sleep patterns. So you'll get some people who just will sleep all the time. I remember at one point I was maybe sleeping about 16, 17, 18 hours some of the time. And then you'll get people who have awful insomnia and they just can't sleep at all. And that's going to be hugely detrimental to any recovery that they are seeing. So personally, I find myself flipping between the two. Most of the time I would fit into the sleeping too much category, and then I would find myself with the week of insomnia, which would just be, on top of everything else, absolutely crippling. This could be a result pain, anxiety, overstimulation of the sympathetic nervous system, sleep disordered breathing, potentially other things as well. So I think one thing that we can do, and is a really important role that we can play, is trying to help clients to get better quality sleep through their breathing, obviously other lifestyle modifications that are very helpful. But I think also being very aware that people with long COVID maybe struggling cognitively. They may not actually be able to do some of the things that you might suggest. So we could say, oh well, it's great to get up and get some daylight and get moving in the morning. Yes, that will help your sleep pattern, but actually for some people with long COVID, it's well known that dysautonomia makes you quite difficult to function in the morning. So you may find that actually some of these clients, as much as they may want to get up and get moving in the morning, physically are not able to do so. But breathing is something that we can help with. I think the mouth taping at night, that made such a difference to me. Like literally the first time I put tape over my mouth and slept, I woke up in the morning and I felt like a new person. But it also took me quite a long time to get to the point where I could do that. So all of the things like getting people to tape up during the day, that did help me. But some people will have all sorts of kind of trauma associated with breathing if they had quite severe breathing difficulties during their initial infection. So I was at the point actually where wearing a mask would sort of almost put me into a panic attack at times. So the thought of mouth taping was not one that I got on with to start with. It wasn't until I actually improved my breathing a bit to the point where I, could actually breathe, that I was able to consider that. So again, listen to your clients. If they say mouth taping, absolutely not, then, we work on what we can. That's always been a huge thing for me. What can we do? There's so much that we can't, but there are also so many things that we can. I think I've gone off on a massive tangent there. So over to you, Vikki.
Okay, here's a bit of a contentious one. We're going to put this out there, and only because it's affected me, and it's something we have to be very gentle with. So with Oxygen Advantage and with Butica, we use the Bolt score and the control pause as a measure of the improvement of someone's breathing function. I would caution you to use it with people who are suffering from long COVID, only because we're very delicate little flowers, most of us. But kidding aside, we are looking at feeling better. That's the biggest win that we can have on a day-to-day basis. Are we feeling better? Now, the Bolt score and the control pause doesn't improve in a linear fashion based on us doing breathing exercises. So I can do the breathing exercises, then I can check in and do my Bolt score as a long COVID sufferer, and there's no improvement. In fact, there is a dip. Now, going back to the triggers, going back to the stressors, that can be a huge stressor. That could stress me to say, uh-oh, am I getting worse? Uh-oh, am I going to have a relapse? So these are things just to consider. You may have a client that wants to have that measurement, but if they don't feel like you need to measure it. They will come up with their little wins. In fact, I invite you to ask them, what are your little wins? Are you feeling better? The big thing about long COVID is how we're feeling. We honestly don't care about the numbers. We really don't. Like I said, low Bolt scores and control pause kind of cement the illness with us. But this whole unlinear progression it mirrors long COVID. So we kind of get a good day, we get a bad day, we get a good day, we get a bad day. We know that we're going to have that. We're already experiencing that on a day-to-day basis. So I know that as breath instructors, you have been taught to check in, to use it, but be very aware of who you're using it with. All right, we're getting to couple of the last couple of slides. Wanted to talk about some of the pitfalls with long COVID clients. And the reason that we wanted to include these is because we've done them. You know, a cookie cutter program is not going to work with someone with long COVID. You are going to make a program that fits with your client on an individual basis. So pull from all your amazing education and your work, and that's how you're going to have success with these clients. Now, measuring success is not going to be based on the Bolt score. It's going to be based on, one, your connection with the client, because never discount the importance of you in your client's life. Like I said, long COVID is very lonely. You know, the importance of Patrick in my life, I will never forget. You know, it's the first person, he was my lifeline to that beginning recovery. The other thing that I think we have as coaches, as breathing instructors, is we have expectations. And if we put our expectations on improvement too high, our clients are not going to reach that. And, you know, I don't want to say ego, but we need to just leave that alone. You know, don't enforce your goals. Don't talk over their heads. We're not, sometimes we have cognitive issues. So it's like keeping it simple for your clients is sometimes so gratefully received. And the takeaways from our little presentation, like I said, we are, as long COVID sufferers, we're fragile. So please handle your clients with care. You are a lifeline to them. Your win is not necessarily their win. So don't worry about the statistics, because that's not what they care about. They care about how they feel. And we, you know, Jackie and I both find a lot of pleasure in the little wins. The little wins of long COVID actually make a lot of us laugh. And that's what you're going to find. You're going to find you're making this huge relationship with your client, probably more than you will ever know. But we're all very, very unique. And that's, I think that's a little bit of the, you know, you're kind of diving into something that maybe you haven't experienced, but we're very unique, but we are not making this up. This is real. And people like you who can go out and change these people with long COVID world are so important. So what we've taken, or what we've given, is in no means supposed to scare you. It's supposed to invite you to go out there and help others. But just knowing that we're a delicate, fragile population.
So I think that's the end of our kind of wee presentation. We'll give you a moment to ask any questions if you like. We've got all sorts of social media stuff which you will hopefully be seeing on your screen there. We are always happy to answer questions. So if you have long COVID clients and you've got a query, please fire us an email or contact us on social. We would be really, really happy to talk. And we have 2 webinars coming up, which are for people with long COVID. So again, if you do have long COVID clients, then feel free to send them to us for those webinars. We're just going to sort of take them through a few bits and pieces. I will, once I've got rid of the presentation in a minute, I will drop the links to them into the chat so you can send them on if you like. They'll also be on our social media if you don't manage to get them down today. So I think, unless there's anything else that Vikki wants to say, I will open the floor to questions if anyone has any.
I was just going to say the first seminar that we're going to do is for long COVID sufferers, and that's going to be on Monday. The second seminar that we're going to do is we're going to do one for people with long COVID that are endurance athletes or that were athletes prior to getting COVID, because teaching them breathing patterns or correct breathing exercises is something that they are really open to learning. And it seems like, unfortunately, a lot of athletes do suffer from long COVID. So for the oxygen advantage instructors out there, that is, something to be aware of, that there are a lot of long COVID sufferers who were athletes prior to getting long COVID. I can see a question from Carsten there. What's your control pause and how did you get it up while having long COVID? Okay, so my control pause when I first measured it with Patrick was 3. And I have managed to get it up over the past 2 years. At some points, it's gotten up to 15. So I'm still considered a dysfunctional breather by oxygen advantage or Butico standards, but I'm not. I'm just someone with long COVID. So I do my exercises, but that's what we were talking about, how delicate we are, that I do my exercises, but I'm not over that 20, the score of 20. So you can see that is a pitfall to using it as a progressive thing. And it was honestly one of the reasons that I stopped measuring mine. But I'll ask Jackie what hers was.
Yeah, I mean, mine also was about 3 seconds when I first measured it. I was, very much mouth breathing and, out of breath at rest. Really, really, really poor breathing. And again, one of the reasons that I'm not going to say we don't want to use the control pause, but certainly one of the reasons that we would definitely caution you is because when I first did my control pause, it actually almost put me into a trauma response because of the having to hold my breath thing was so kind of traumatic for me having to do that. Over time, I managed to get mine up. I don't measure it anymore because I don't care. I know that probably goes against everything that we've been taught, but for me, it's more on how I feel. I think over long COVID, one of the things that we learn is listen to your body, and that's something that I was very much not doing before. Whereas now, I listen to my body, and that tells me what I'm doing. What breathing exercise should I be doing today? Well, actually, I feel maybe a bit stressed. Well, I know what to do about that. I know what exercises to do. The last time I measured it, it was over the 20 mark, but not by very much. But I think, again, tapping into what Vikki was saying just there, is that actually I think that trauma has a huge effect on our control pause. So I think mine is actually artificially low, but that's my theory. Yeah, are there any other questions? Feel free to drop them into the chat or to stick your hands up if anyone does have any for us just now. Is it possible that a client can be considered long COVID if their control pause is over 20, but they feel that they can't breathe when wearing the N95 mask, which was not the case before their COVID?
You know what? It's one of the things about long COVID. You can have an elevated control pause. You can have an elevated Bolt score of up to 30 and still be suffering from the symptoms of long COVID. So that's where this whole being using each client as a unique client. So you've got to get in touch with what symptoms they are having, and then giving them a program that is going to suit them. And one of the things that I always think about is when I started doing the Oxygen Advantage, what a huge stressor breathing light was for me. It was so difficult. That feeling of suffocation was such a huge trigger. That's why we didn't include it in that slide. But you may have people with long COVID that will tolerate learning to breathe light. So I think, that's why we're kind of presenting this stuff. It's like, get to know your client, find what does and doesn't work. But remember that, our thing about caring for people is to do no harm. So we've all had incidences where we've been stressed too much, or we've caused stress on other people, and we just want to make you aware of that.
I think as well, it's remembering that, you know, that person may be measuring their control pose when they're in their sort of their okay period. But what happens if they go into a crash? What happens if they measured their control pose there? Would it still be 20? But I think, long COVID, the symptoms are such a wide range of symptoms that actually their breathing may actually be okay. They might be a relatively functional breather, but they may be suffering from all sorts of the other symptoms. So, just because their breathing is actually okay doesn't mean that we can't use the breath to influence the nervous system to therefore help a load of the other symptoms, if that makes sense.
It
But I
is,
think
and I
again,
love.
sorry, Vicky.
No, I was reading Paula's about how we can do walking exercises, and sometimes the win is just to be able to go out and walk and nasal breathe. So you're going to get clients at every stage of long COVID. I can go out, walk and nasal breathe, and maybe do a breath hold of 1 to 3 steps. But these are things that as a breathing instructor I kind of know, and you will get to know your clients. So like I said, it's finding those little wins without causing them too much stress. So a win may be go out for a walk if they're ambulatory, and that they are just holding their breath for 2 or 3 steps. So these are things that you kind of just bring into your coaching, knowing what to look for.
Yeah, so yeah, just really assessing each client as a separate client every time you see them effectively, because in some ways they could well be. I'm just trying to multitask, which is why I'm looking really distracted, to drop those links into the chat there. So bear with me a second. Was there anything else in the chat, Vicky?
No, I was just kind of, if anyone's got a question, it might be easier just for them to raise their hand, just because I can't read all the chats. But everyone, thank you for joining us. We appreciate this because we want to get this word out, and we are available if anyone has any questions away from the seminar. We're happy to answer and help in any way we can.
Yeah, exactly. As Vicky said, we're so happy to just do get in touch. This obviously has been recorded, so we'll circulate that as well. I think there were people who wanted to come but weren't able to for various reasons. We'll also try and find a way to circulate those 2 links that I just put in the chat as well. But I think they'll also be available on our social media and things too. So cool. Well, we've managed to keep it under an hour, so I don't know if
that was our intention, because I have long COVID. Need to keep it short for me.
So yeah, I think if there aren't any more questions, let's call that a night. And yeah, thank you so much for being here and for sharing this with us and for allowing us to share our experiences and all the things we've learned and everything. And yeah, I was going to say something profound, but I can't remember what it was. So
All right. Thank you, everybody.
yeah,
Enjoy the rest of your day wherever you are.